Good morning. Another small and intimate group today. It's the end of summer. People have things to do. So once again today, let's talk about the 108 gates of Dharma illumination. 11 today, we're taking up gate number 11. The mindfulness of generosity is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we do not expect reward. So maybe you're thinking, oh no, she's going to spend the next hour telling me to play nicely and share my toys, and I will be happy. Or I should feel grateful for all the good things in my life and should, want to give something back. So, yeah, generosity, hearts and flowers. Boring. So we do hear a lot about generosity in this practice, particularly I think when it's time for Dharma centers to get the annual appeal letter out. I don't know about you, but I've written a lot of them and received a lot of them, and they typically start out something like, in our practice, dana means giving, and then it goes on to say why we should be grateful for this opportunity to give generously to our Dharma center. There's nothing wrong with that. It's amazing, though, how similar they start to sound. There is a lot of gee whiz, I think, generalized discussion of generosity in spiritual communities, somewhere at the very kind of top basic level. But actually, generosity is a fairly complex set of teachings, or a fairly complex topic, because it's interwoven with a lot of other things. I think we find this the more we practice, that many teachings are sort of interwoven, and there are many ways to look at the same one true reality. But the more you dig into generosity and get sort of beyond that really top level, there are many things going on. So Dogen has a lot to say about it, Sawaki Roshi did, Uchiyama Roshi did, Hojo-san does too. They've all had something to say about generosity. And I think because generosity sort of flies in the face of our most basic delusions. So that's what really can make generosity a challenge. We're all good-hearted people, we're all open-hearted people, and yet sometimes generosity is a challenge. And because it really goes against some of our most basic misperceptions about who we are and how this universe works. So let's consider today what generosity really is. Let's think about what difference it makes when we are mindful of generosity. In other words, we bear generosity in mind and we don't forget to practice. So when we think of generosity, we maybe think about giving something to somebody else. Maybe that's money, or maybe it's material things. Someone who is generous, we think, tends to put the needs and desires of others ahead of his or her attachment to possessions. But there's a lot more going on here, because we also have to think about receiving. How do we receive without attachment? How does generosity arise? So there are many things happening here. So dana, we know this word dana means generosity. Dana was a part of Indian society long before the Buddha kind of arose. Generally, dana had to do with charity, either to the poor, giving to the poor directly, or perhaps doing some kind of public works, building something like parks or something that everybody benefited from. One of the earliest Hindu texts says, "Giving to the poor is true charity. All other giving expects some return." So this Dharma gate has already said, mindfulness of generosity is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we do not expect reward. So this early Hindu text is saying charity giving to the poor is a true charity, because there's nothing we're going to get back. So this is really a very old teaching. This constellation of teachings is quite old. So of course it's good to help other people who need our help. That's a good thing. It's good to try to ease the suffering in the world. This is our bodhisattva practice. So if somehow we're able to help feed the hungry and house the homeless, or even just, you're lending your book to a classmate who forgot her book for the discussion group, those are the kind of daily physical acts of generosity that we might engage in. But in the larger absolute view, of course, there is no giving, there is no gift, there is no receiver. It feels like, on a day-to-day basis, I have some object or I own something, and I can give it to you if you need it. And that's a basic kind of generosity. But actually in this one unified reality, of course, there is no separation between giver, receiver, and gift. It's all one big dynamic thing. that's working together. So there's nothing I can grasp. We already know this from our practice, right? There's nothing we can grasp because everything is changing. So there's nothing I can hold on to and say, I own this, and I've always, owned it, and now I'm passing it on to you. So really, we're all just temporary caretakers for our stuff, right? I think I notice this the most when it comes to things we collect. I, for instance, am interested in early American pattern glass. I have a collection of early American pattern glass of a particular kind. And who knows who's owned these things in the 120 or so years that these things have been in existence. Who knows who has owned these things? I sometimes imagine that. One of the reasons I like this pattern glass is, it's, bowls and pitchers and cruets and usable objects. And so I imagine, what was the family that owned this? Was this a wedding gift at some point? How did they live? What did they eat out of these things? I have compotes. I don't know if you've ever seen a compote, but it's like a bowl with a foot. Nobody today would buy and own a compote. We wouldn't eat fruit that way, And so there's just all this social history tied up in these collections. So I imagine over time, it's just another manifestation of aggregates, right? So over time, these things have been owned and used, who knows where, because I buy them from all over the place. eBay is a wonderful thing. And they come together in my house, and I have this collection, and when I die, or become incompetent, somehow that's going to be dispersed, and somebody else will own those objects. And probably nobody's going to buy my collection lock, stock, and barrel, because somebody collects wine glasses. And somebody collects the particular pattern of the glass that I have. And somebody collects, pitchers, right? And they're probably going to disperse. So this collection comes together briefly. I'm a caretaker for it. I'm sort of curating it, right? And that's going to move on. Which is the way all of our stuff is, whether that's material stuff or other kind of stuff. We're really just caretakers for it all, kind of on a temporary basis. So it's really not possible for me to lose something by offering it to you, because I don't actually permanently own it. So Sawaki Roshi's expression, and maybe you've heard this, gaining is delusion and losing is enlightenment. So this doesn't mean we shouldn't own anything. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have any possessions. We need things in our daily lives just to take care of this body and mind, and to do our work in the world, and to function and survive. So it doesn't mean we should give away everything we have somehow. This practice is not about martyrdom. I'm going to be a pure practitioner by giving away everything I own. It means that the idea that there is something we can gain that we don't already have is delusion, right? We already have everything in a big absolute way. Losing the idea that there is something to be given or received or gained or lost is enlightenment, right? So Dogen says offering is not being greedy. Or another way that's sometimes translated is giving is non-attachment. So simply by not being attached to something, we're making an offering. So we may not be out on the street corner sort of giving things away, but we might be not drawing a line between my stuff and your stuff and trying to keep all my stuff for myself and getting more stuff, right? And somehow behind our little protective line, this is my stuff. So if I'm not doing that, that's already offering. That's already generosity. Simply to not make that distinction in an absolute way. So Dogen goes on to say, it's like offering treasures we are about to discard to those we do not know. So something we're about to discard is not something to which we are attached. And we're going to give that to somebody we don't know. So there's no expectation of return. We're not building a relationship. This person isn't going to come back and thank us. It's like offering treasures we are about to discard to those we do not know. So Hojo-san tells a story about when he was moving from Minneapolis to here. And when he was in Minneapolis, he and his family, when they arrived from Japan, they couldn't bring all that much stuff. So a Sangha member had given them a rocking horse for their kids, because their kids were very small. And over the course of the time they lived and practiced in Minneapolis, the kids grew up. And this poor rocking horse endured some damage because little children were playing with it, and it got moved around and banged around. So by the time they were ready to move here, this rocking horse was already, the kids had outgrown it. They couldn't play with it anymore. And had some breakage and had some damage. And they decided, well, this is not even worth giving to somebody. We're just going to throw it away. So they put it out on the sidewalk. And he says within 10 minutes of putting this broken rocking horse on the sidewalk, somebody had taken it home. Somebody had picked it up. And he said, we don't know who that person was. That person wasn't going to come up and thank us. There was no return. So they were giving away something, they were discarding something they didn't need to somebody they didn't know. So that's real kind of selfless giving, right? That's real generosity. So Dogen says all of our giving should be done with this kind of non-attachment, whether we're giving something which is really important and valuable, or whether it's something that's relatively unimportant. All of our giving should be done with this kind of openness, not expecting any kind of return. So we can see how this idea of generosity actually includes a lot of things. There's a lot of things going on here. So, I mean, just quickly, generosity, of course, is related to generosity is related to teachings about craving and aversion. Some of the most basic stuff we deal with is about having preferences or not having preferences, judging and labeling. This is important for me. This isn't important for me. It's okay if I give this away because it's, not valuable to me. All of that stuff gets in the way of generosity, judging and labeling it, right? It's related to the second precept about not stealing. Dogen says, when mind and its objects are in thusness, the gate of liberation is open. That's what he says about that second precept about not stealing. When mind and its objects are in thusness, the gate of liberation is open. So when I really see that there is no separation between mind and objects, or between giver, receiver, and gift, there is nothing that's mine and not mine, and I'm not constrained by greed. So the gate of liberation is open. This is also related to three minds that gives our place here its name. Magnanimous mind, nurturing mind, joyful mind. It's pretty tough to cultivate those approaches to our life and to our practice if we're not generous, right? Magnanimous mind accepts everything. Nurturing mind wants all beings to be well, right? I mean, how can we do that if we don't have a practice of generosity? So some of these teachings and practices help us to cultivate generosity, and some of them are what happens when we have that and we practice that in the world. So if the opposite of generosity is greed, one of the three poisonous minds, greed, anger, and ignorance. So if greed is the opposite of generosity, then cultivating generosity would seem to be an important practice in dealing with these most basic delusions that we have. So if we somehow can cultivate generosity, find opportunities for generosity, it helps us go from being inflexible, kind of rigid and closed, and sort of self-involved, to being more accepting, to being more outward-looking. After all, being generous isn't only about offering materials. We can also offer open-heartedness to others, or in the world. We can offer acceptance of them. We all know how good it feels and what a relief it is when others can just accept us for who we are, and we can really be authentic. We can drop all the stuff, right? And know that unconditionally somebody will accept us. That's a terrific feeling. And it's a feeling of spaciousness, right? We're not feeling constrained. It's a real gift. And if we can offer that to others, what a real gift that is. If they're doing something unskillful, that doesn't mean we condone unskillful behavior, but we can simply accept that here is another human being with quirks and foibles just like we have. They may be different quirks and foibles, but we all have quirks and foibles. We're all suffering in some way. Our practice is all incomplete in some way. So over and over we encounter teachings from Buddhas and ancestors about how we sit zazen. We begin to see how the world actually works. We gain some understanding of interdependence. We have some experience, some direct touching of interdependence. On that basis, our selfishness gives way to compassion and to the desire to help others. And as Dogen says, practice and awakening are not two. So we sit in zazen, we get some clarity. On that basis, we realize grasping self is not helpful and is actually based on illusion and delusion. And when we can really see through that, then compassion and generosity and open-heartedness arise naturally. We have a natural desire to help all beings. because all beings are not separate from us. So this is not something we need to go out and sort of acquire. I don't need to go out and acquire generosity as something I'm going to paste on over the top of the rest of my life. Generosity is what happens when we get out of the way. It's already here. We're already generous beings. How do we find that? When that's covered up some days, how do we find that? So generosity comes from our Zazen practice and comes from the rest of our practice. It's not enough for me to sit here and say, you should be generous. Or for anybody to tell you, this is how we should be. So this non-attachment, this concern for others arises because we see interdependence for ourselves. Not because somebody says, oh, there's interdependence, but because we actually sit down and see what's going on. And we see that this really is the nature of ourselves and all beings and the way the universe works. And it becomes one of the bases for how we choose to be in the world. It provides us a certain kind of information which influences our actions of body, speech, and mind. So greed doesn't arise because greed just doesn't make sense anymore. If I really clearly see that there is nothing I can permanently own, greed doesn't arise. Because now we have good information. It says, that doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make logical sense. How can I grasp and build a lot of self around something that I can't actually own? So generosity arises from our practice and within our practice in the same way that compassion does, in the same way that right action does, in the same way that anything we skillfully offer in this world does. Not because we've gone out and tried to create something which isn't here, or to be somebody we're not. It arises naturally because we practice. So we might think of generosity as a feeling, or as an impulse. I'm feeling generous today. Or we think of it as something emotional. But generosity is a practice, just like all of our practice is a practice. It's something we actually do. It's something we actually engage in that benefits ourselves and benefits others. So it's not something abstract. It's not something out there. We kind of wait for the lightning bolt to hit and then we're generous. Or we generally feel generous. It's an actual practice. So we don't wait to feel generous until we hear some circumstance that makes us feel that way. Although we might in this world of suffering. Hear about somebody who needs our help. Or hear about a natural disaster and we want to somehow help with that suffering. We can do that, but really, this practice is about finding those opportunities on a day-by-day, moment-by-moment basis to practice generosity. And they're out there, right? There are plenty of people who need help. There's plenty of opportunity for us to be open-hearted and open-handed. And to give up the idea that this stuff is mine and it's only mine, and I want more stuff. So Dogen has some things to say about generosity, about Dana Paramita, or the perfection of giving. Last week we briefly reviewed the 6 paramitas, or the 6 perfections: offering, precepts, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom. So Dogen says the Dana is the first of the paramitas because it's the most powerful in changing the minds of beings. So he puts it first in the list because it's the most powerful of the 6 in changing our habituated thinking, in breaking up our delusion. So Dogen says the mind of a sentient being is difficult to change. We begin to transform the mind of beings by offering material things, and we resolve to continue to transform them until they attain the way. From the beginning, we should make use of offering. So offering is a powerful practice. It's powerful for changing this one, and it's powerful for changing other beings that we encounter. So similarly, Uchiyama Roshi said, for breaking the ego's grip, nothing is more effective than giving something up. I love that. I used to have that pinned to my wall. For breaking the ego's grip, nothing is more effective than giving something up. Of course, something we value, right? Something we are attached to. So here's where precepts can come in, I think, because they ask us to give up things like praising self, or like misusing intoxicants, or taking whatever we want, or all of those things. We may really enjoy doing that stuff. But precepts and practice ask us to give that up for the benefit of ourselves and the benefit of all beings. And when we do that, there's an opportunity to sort of start to break the grip of ego and grasping and craving and aversion. When we give up the chance to break precepts, what we're offering to others then is safety, security, peace. We're not a threat to anybody. If we're not breaking precepts, that's a real offering. We're offering people the chance to settle around us and to not be threatened by us. So, giving up, I've always thought that giving up the opportunity to feed our egos by praising ourselves, calling attention to what we do, fishing for compliments, is a generous act. Other beings appreciate when we're not out there taking up all the space and sucking all the air out of the room, And it's just so easy for us to want to do that because we want to be liked, we want to be accepted, we want people to be impressed with us. So it's so easy to drop into that habit of humble bragging or, bringing up something we did or something we bought so somebody will think we're hot stuff, right? Simply giving up the opportunity to do that, nobody will ever know we did it, right? But when we do, what an offering that is. Because people don't have to deal with our stuff. So people appreciate that. We sort of offer that renunciation to all beings. And that's something we can really do on a moment-by-moment basis because we know we're constantly being provided with opportunities to feed the ego and to praise ourselves and to search for that somehow. So Hojo-san says, because we all have a tendency to gain something desirable and not to lose anything we possess, we need to actively practice not to gain and to lose. This was a very important teaching to me since from the beginning. You can hear him saying this, right? Since from the beginning. So we have to actively find ways to practice not gaining, not losing. Practice generosity. Because our habituated thinking leads us to default toward this kind of self-centeredness, right? So practice and understanding are, again, complementary here, as is true in so many other areas of our practice. If we actively practice generosity and cultivate selflessness, that's sort of one side. And on the other side, understanding the emptiness of the self, or the true nature of the self, leads to generosity. So we need these two things. We need wisdom and we need compassion. We need to be doing something about generosity, and we also need the understanding that leads us naturally to be generous. So when Dogen says that generosity can change the minds of living beings, of course that includes ourselves. Practicing generosity deepens our own understanding of the true nature of reality, as well as helping other beings. So that help, again, is not just material, it's not just stuff, or information or whatever we're giving. Receiving is also a practice. Can we receive generosity with generosity? We probably grew up hearing that it's better to give than to receive, but receiving needs an equal amount of attention in our practice. Giving and receiving require an equal amount of attention. Because receiving can be hard, right? Receiving can be very difficult. We have to receive in order to allow others to practice generosity. So we're really opening a door for others and their practice of open-handedness and open-heartedness if we can receive skillfully. And that's not always an easy thing to do. Sometimes our tenzo, when we're finished with a meal or we're finished with a sesshin, and we say, gee, thank you for cooking, and he says, thank you for eating. And at first people think that's a joke, but it's not. Because if you weren't eating, he would not have the opportunity to practice as a tenzo. And it is a practice, it's a very deep practice of offering. Because he could be cooking to feed his ego. Gee, I'm going to cook fancy food so everyone thinks I'm a great cook. Or he can simply provide meals that nourish practice and allow us to get back on the cushion for 14 periods a day. So when we say thank you for cooking and he says thank you for eating, he's not kidding. And I know because I was a tenzo. And I used to do the same thing. It's that practice of receiving is really important. And it allows for others to practice. So it's not just a quick courtesy, right? So in our practice, I'm sure you're aware about takuhatsu, or alms rounds. And that's kind of the same thing. So when the monks would go out in Buddha's time, and they would collect whatever people were willing to give. And on the surface that looks like isn't that great. Monks get food and they can survive. but they're also out there providing lay people the opportunity to give and the opportunity to create merit. So if they weren't out there on alms rounds, people couldn't give. And I've done takuhatsu in Japan, and it's a wonderful practice of letting go of your ego. So in Japan, we wear hats that come down to here. So the person who's giving doesn't know who you are. So sometimes, if they can see I'm a tall Western female, people are a little worried. But if they can't see under my hat, I'm just any old monk, nun, whatever, and people could give. And I think, I recall Hojo-san telling a story about, we're out there doing takuhatsu. He always felt like people were giving to Buddha. They weren't giving to him. They were giving to the robe, right? So it's this kind of selfless giving. There's no expectation of some kind of personal reward. We don't say thank you. We just chant for people, maybe. So that, too, is the same kind of opening the door for somebody to be generous as part of their own practice. We're allowing givers to give. We're allowing them to offer. So in giving and receiving skillfully, especially as bodhisattvas, we're out there actually demonstrating how to do this, which is really kind of interesting. When we see somebody giving skillfully and receiving skillfully, that's kind of encouraging. It's kind of inspirational. And that person may or may not be a practitioner. But that's something that our practice provides in the world. Can we show somebody how to receive in a selfless way? Or to give in a selfless way? When things stop being the objects of our thinking, or the objects of our consciousness, in other words, when there's no separation, then we can give and receive and use whatever it is to help all beings without getting in the way. So there's, this thing out here is no longer an object of me. Whatever it is I'm giving or receiving is not an object of my consciousness. It's just part of this functioning world. So we don't have those hindrances about ego and attachment and delusion and all that stuff. Then that transaction, that encounter, is clean, if you will. It's not sticky. It's not muddy. Mindfulness of generosity is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we do not expect reward. So what if what we're attached to is not whatever we're giving, but whatever we think we're going to get back? Whatever reward may come from our giving. What if that's our attachment? As soon as we give up dealing with things from the perspective of what they mean for this one, or from the perspective of my own agenda about it, that's generosity. So we give for a lot of reasons. Generosity is a good thing. Even if there's a little bit of self-interest in there, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be generous, or that we shouldn't give whatever, or offer whatever we're offering. But we know, if we look carefully at our giving, our offering, it's usually not entirely selfless. It's pretty hard for any human action to be completely selfless. So, we might give because we want to feel good about ourselves. And actually, fundraisers will tell us that, right? If you listen to something like public broadcasting, well, give to support the programs you love. But of course, the best benefit is that you really feel good about supporting your local station. And I've written plenty of fundraising letters, and I've used it myself. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we need to recognize that that's happening. We're giving in order that we have a self-image. I'm a generous person. I'm supporting whatever. I'm not taking that which is not given by not supporting my station. We might give so that others like us, or that others admire us. Gee, he or she is really an important donor. So we're going to treat that person in a certain way, or something. Maybe we're giving today so that others will give to us tomorrow. I'll support your organization today if I can come back to you later and ask for something for mine. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can be a partnership. That can be cooperation. But again, we need to see what's happening there. So we usually associate generosity with loving kindness or with compassion. But generosity, skillful generosity, really also has to have an element of wisdom. We have to be able to see how the world actually works, and to see that we are supporting all beings and being supported by all beings. So giving is already happening. Generosity is already happening. So things are already flowing to us and from us constantly anyway. This is not something we're adding to our lives or adding to the world. It's already there. We also have to discern whether the gift we're offering is really helpful to whoever is receiving that gift. Are we giving because we want to give something, or are we giving because the recipient actually needs whatever it is? Are we giving money to the panhandler, pretty sure he or she is going to go out and buy alcohol or drugs or do something harmful with that money? There's something called idiot compassion, right? Which simply means we're not thinking through. Are we giving something that's actually helpful? Are we giving something to somebody that we would want in that circumstance, or are we giving what that person actually needs? And that's kind of subtle. That's kind of tricky. Because in our heart of hearts, we really want to ameliorate somebody's suffering. And we would say, well, if that was me, I would want da-da-da-da-da, so that's what I'm giving. But is that what that person wants? I don't know about you, but I've been on the other end of that, where I can see quite clearly this person means well, but what they're offering me is just not what I need right now. I'll come and sit with you while you suffer through da-da-da-da. Well, actually, what I want is to be by myself. But thank you. This person really wants to help me. And that's tough, because how do you say, well, no, thank you? Sometimes you have to accept it because you need to open the door for that person's offering, right? All of this is really hard. It's a real bodhisattva practice. It's more difficult than we think. Maybe we're just giving so this person goes away. Here's somebody asking again. If I just give something, this person will go away? Maybe that's really helpful. Maybe it isn't, I don't know. But there's all these kind of motivations for giving. If I just do what this person wants, he or she'll leave me alone. So this all takes wisdom, right? As well as compassion. We have to see clearly what we're doing and why. We have to clearly look at our motivations. Which again, doesn't mean we shouldn't be giving, but we really need to see clearly what's going on. So we have to ask ourselves, is the reward that we get from the giving we're doing worth the suffering it may be bringing to the receiver? Right? It's very tricky. So, as part of our practice, we can ask ourselves and try to be as honest with ourselves as we can be. Where or with whom in my life can I give, or do I give with absolutely no expectation of return? And it's probably pretty hard for us to find that circumstance in our lives. So, and that's okay. As I say, most human actions are not entirely selfless. It's really hard to do. But maybe we choose a circumstance in our lives with the least amount of stickiness, if you will, the least amount of expected reward. And then we can consider why that particular situation is that way. What is it about that circumstance? What is it about that relationship that allows us to give in a way that does not expect reward? And once we've spent some time with that and done some discernment around that, then how do we move that circumstance or that kind of practice, that kind of spirit, into other areas of our lives? If I can give without expectation of reward here, how do I expand that window? How do I cultivate other opportunities to give in that way and to be generous in that way? So it's good to pay attention to what's going on in the body and mind when we give. What's arising? What feeling is happening? So when we don't forget to practice generosity, what's arising here? Do we have some expectation about how this transaction should go? Well, if I give, then such and so should happen. I should feel a certain way, or this person should behave in a certain way, or something should happen. When I'm practicing generosity, what stories am I telling myself? Oh, this is just like that other time when? Or, oh, I'm always like this, or he or she is always like this, or, here's, right? We've got lots of history, usually, around generosity. Maybe we've been around generous people, maybe we haven't. And it's really hard to break free of those stories. So what stories am I telling myself about what's happening here? And is it what's actually happening here? Or is it my story? Do I feel in my body and mind some hesitation, some holding back when I have some opportunity for generosity? And what's that obstacle? Right? It's usually fear. If we're fearless, we're happy to give. So if we're not completely comfortable, there's some fear involved, what's going on? When I encounter an opportunity for generosity, do I feel some contraction? Do I feel some depletion? If I'm giving, am I somehow diminished? Am I losing something from that? If I'm giving, am I feeling weak? Sometimes if we give, we're feeling like, well, I'm giving up something, and that's a sign of weakness somehow. So all of these things play into our fears about what is the nature of self, right? And it makes it hard for us to give. So traditionally, there are three kinds of things we can give in this practice. One is material support, so things like food and clothing. So traditionally, back in the ancient days, laity in particular would provide food or various kinds of material support to the monks or to the Sangha, as well as perhaps giving to those in society who needed some help. So if we have the resources today, certainly we can try to provide for folks who need help with basic needs, people who need food or shelter or clothing or something. For me, for years, I've done a lot of charity knitting. I knit, hats and baby clothes and stuff to give away, but you all might work in soup kitchens or, in homeless shelters or crisis nurseries or something like that. If we can do that, if we have the resources to do that, of course, that's a nice thing to do. It's a good thing to do. The second kind of thing we can give is fearlessness, because we're making various kinds of efforts to see through our own stuff and to see through our own delusions and not to harm other beings. In that way, we free them from fear. So what we're giving them is fearlessness. So because of the precepts, if we're following the precepts, we're no threat to anybody's lives, we're no threat to their property, we're no threat to their well-being. What we're offering them is the chance to not be scared. Or at least not be scared of us. So as it says in the Heart Sutra, the Bodhisattva relies on wisdom. The mind is without hindrance, and without hindrance there is no fear. So it seems a little strange to think that generosity and fear are quite closely tied together. But this is what happens when we look beyond the surface of this, right? It's not just about being nice. There's some pretty challenging stuff going on. So it's fear that gets in the way of our generosity. We have some aspiration to give or some impulse to give, but gee, what if I give this thing and then, something happens that I don't want? I feel diminished, or somebody takes something more from me than I want to give. Am I giving more than I should be giving in a healthy way? Do I look weak? Do I look like a sucker? Do I look like a patsy? I mean, come on. There's all kinds of self-image tied up in this thing. But really, again, we can, if we're being mindfulness of generosity, in other words, we're remembering to practice, we're not forgetting to practice, what we remember is, I don't really own anything. So I have everything. If there's nothing I own, then no problem. It's the same with the receiver. The receiver already has everything. So there's nothing to offer, there's nothing to accept. Nothing actually changes in a big way. So that means we don't have to own something in order to offer it to the universe. So we might think it's strange to hear teachings about, well, we can offer the flowers in the prairie, we can offer the snow on the mountaintop, we can offer a sunset to the world. And we think, well, how can we do that? Because we don't own it. And that's all right. The way we offer those things is to enter into the actual authentic relationship that we have with them, rather than the made-up relationship that's about being separate and having an agenda. If I fully enter into that sunset, that snow on the mountain, that whatever, and I know that there's no separation here, that's me getting out of the way. And that's a mighty big offering. Right? Because as soon as we do that, then there's no expectation of reward. What are we possibly going to get back from offering a waterfall to the universe? There's no reward. And yet that's a pretty big kind of offering, because we're just getting our stuff out of the way. So, yeah. So the third thing traditionally that we can give, so we've talked about material things, we've talked about giving fearlessness. The third thing traditionally we can give is the Dharma. So it's said that actually that's the highest gift of all, is the gift of Dharma. So it might be, if you're a Dharma teacher, you're doing that by teaching. But if you're not a Dharma teacher, you can still make practice possible. for yourself and for all beings. And that's a huge kind of generosity. Somehow just facilitating Dharma being shared. And of course, there are lots of ways to do that. Yes, you can give it to your local Dharma center. We have a, a fund appeal going on as we speak. There's that. But really, as we saw last week, simply showing up. When we talked about Sangha, we talked about the value of simply showing up. Is an offering of Dharma, because you're making it easier, more possible for others to practice. Simply coming and lending your spirit is making it possible for others to practice. So yes, you can certainly underwrite things in your Dharma center. You can stand on the street corner and give out sutra books. You can invite people to come to a Tuesday night getting started session. All of those things are good. But one of the most, I think, rewarding things we can offer, if you want to look at it that way, simply making practice possible by doing our own practice, by doing our bodhisattva practice in the world, and by showing up here to support the rest of the Sangha in doing what they do. It's just opening the door and holding the door open for the continuation of Dharma here. Both for people who are here now and for people who are coming, right? If we continue to practice, we make it possible for people in the future to practice. And we know, somebody asked me just last week, so like how often do you get new people? All the time, I said. Like every week? Oh yes. So simply by coming and joining together, we make that continuation possible. So just by coming today, you've already engaged in the highest form of generosity. Right? So what would you like to say about giving, offering, generosity, receiving, all of those kinds of things? What strikes you as puzzling? What strikes you as helpful? What's on your mind? Please.
I also think of generosity as including giving your time.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, people are in such a hurry, and like somebody wants to talk or would like to, engage in conversation with maybe later or something, and rush off. I mean, I think sometimes just giving our attention and also our ear, listening. I think the generosity of listening. I think those are things that we don't often think about, but giving time and giving our ear.
I think that's right, because we may be listening to somebody who's not easy to listen to, or we're just distracted and want to go on and do other things. I think that's a huge demonstration of open-handedness and open-heartedness, simply to take the time with somebody who really needs our attention. Just being present with somebody.
I think sometimes it's a problem in families where the parents are so busy and the kids, need a little bit of attention or would like some, like the parents to play with them or something. And they don't have the time, so I think that can be a problem.
That's right. So, sometimes what we're giving is material things, and sometimes what we're giving is the Dharma, and sometimes it's just giving time, giving attention.
One other thing that occurred to me as you were talking about, the fact of giving and receiving, I think when that's operating completely, we're really talking about kind of the circulation of energy, the circulation of wisdom. And I think it kind of comes back to what Dogen talks about with the Zen-ki, the total dynamic functioning, where there's really just circulation. There's no, there's no end point that is giving and end point that is receiving.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Within one big functioning system. Yeah, it's and I've heard it actually referred to kind of that way. It's like blood flowing. Whatever this energy is or whatever this practice is, it's flowing through the system in that way. So as you say, there's no end point. It comes back. Although we're not looking for reward, somehow just our giving supports others to give back. And yes, it's an endless cycle. Beginningless beginning with an endless end. Please.
I find that I have a really tough time receiving, especially money, because I don't really feel that I need any additional money, but I think, especially since I became a priest, I think people often want to sort of like try to help you, thinking that you've somehow like taken a real vow of poverty, which of course we don't really do anymore. And so, recently someone was trying to give me a not insubstantial amount of money And I tried to refuse like multiple times, and then finally the person said, "It's Donna, you have to accept it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But it's tricky because I didn't really feel like I needed it, and so I don't really. It can be hard to balance in those situations. There was another case too, when I hitchhiked to Gyobutsuji, and there was this thing that happened. I was like sitting on an exit ramp, waiting to get picked up by someone, and there was an accident that happened coming onto the ramp there. And I went over and just said, I was sitting there, I saw what happened. If you need like a witness or something for insurance purposes or whatever, you can come ask me. And then, half an hour later or something, they cleared it up, and one of the person that I had spoken to came over and said, "We didn't need you, but here's like $20 or something." And in that case, I was like, it's not like a huge amount of money, and it probably does make that person feel generous or something, so I felt okay accepting it. But in cases where it's like kind of a lot of money or something, and I don't really need it, I have a tough time navigating, like, how much do you refuse and when do you accept and that sort of thing.
Well, I think that's where wisdom really has to come in, because are they giving to you personally, or are they giving to the robe? And I don't know. I mean, you would know. Is this person giving in order to support practice?
Yeah.
Or is this person giving because he or she thinks, I personally am poverty-stricken? And of course, if they're giving you the practice, it's always possible to just take that, say thank you, and use it for a practice purpose. Sometimes I've done that. Yeah, when like something comes out of the blue, and oh my gosh, there's this huge amount of money. It's happened to me once or twice, not very often. And I kind of have a way to put that aside and use it for practice somehow. Like that's what gets me to a Zen teachers conference, or that's what gets me the robe I need or something. Because I know that they've given to support my practice. So it's not about me, so I feel like in this endless loop, it needs to go back out again somehow. So I'm like the temporary caretaker of it, but how can I turn it to support practice? And you can give it directly to the Dharma Center, but you can use it for your own teaching. So in your case now, you're an ordained person, so how can you use that somehow to support your own study and your own development and your own teaching? In which case you can accept it with quite a clear heart. Because that's not about, I'm going out to buy a Ferrari. How do I turn this back to the benefit of all beings? Because as bodhisattvas, just like we do chanting in the morning and we throw that merit back out, how can you accept that and throw it back out? If somebody's given, your friend's given you something for your birthday, that's different, right? Somebody who's given to you because you're an ordained person, yeah, that's something those of us in robes get to learn how to navigate. I was in Japan once with Blanche Hartman. We were in the airport, I think. I think it was an airport. And so here she was, clearly not Japanese. Here's an clearly older, Western woman, but wearing her traveling stuff, because we all traveled in stuff. She was looking around in a gift shop, and a young man came up to her, and he had like orange hair. And he's Japanese, but orange hair and the mod glasses and the whole deal, and gave her money. And she was just like shocked. She like kind of didn't know what to do. It wasn't what she expected. But he was clearly giving to the robe, and he was a very nice young man, but he clearly wanted to give. And so she accepted, and it was like $10. I mean, it wasn't much, And she accepted it, and then because she said, now I'm going to be able to get something for my grandchildren. She wanted to bring something for her grandchildren, and she actually wasn't able to afford to do that. And she said, now I'm going to be able to, get something for my grandchildren. But it can be surprising when somebody walks up and gives to the robe. In that way, it's like, well, what do I do? Because they're not giving to you. And in that moment, you're Buddha, right? And you're accepting that as Buddha, which is a really interesting practice. Because then you want to say, am I not great for accepting this as Buddha? No, I'm Buddha. Look how important I am. People want to give to my robe. It's like, what? Well, there's a whole complicated thing in there. But the fact that you're out there wearing the robe and offering people the opportunity to give, even though you're not out soliciting, is a whole interesting part of your ordained life. Because in this country, we walk around, nobody knows what this means, right? Walk down the street in Japan, and somebody might, depending on what you look like. Where was I? I think I was in an interfaith group or something. and I don't wear this, I mean, I wear, sign or something, but somebody said, here's $20 for your temple. And it was not a Buddhist person, but it was somebody, again, in a spiritual group who knows ordained people can make use of that giving somehow. I don't know. It's a very interesting thing to navigate. Somebody else wanted to, did you want to jump back in?
Yeah, it's related but not, I mean, I'm wondering if you have any advice for people, like a layperson who has a really hard time receiving. I know a few people who have a really, really hard time. They, you try to offer them, a dinner or something, and they want to pay you the money for it right after the meal.
Well, of course, that's fear, right? I fear that you don't think I can manage by myself, or I fear that you think that I'm not a strong enough person to, buy my own food or whatever. I think there are going to be people who are never going to happily receive, But I think the fact that we continue to offer, and that we continue to offer in a non-judgmental, open-hearted, selfless kind of way, as Dogen says, that's what changes the minds of beings. So if we simply are a presence, and we never ask for anything back or expect anything back, we can offer 100 times and they can refuse 99 times. Okay, we can't maybe do anything about that, but it's like water wearing away the stone, right? Here we are again. And somebody knows that we're simply no threat. Because fear, we have fear because we perceive a threat. So when we stop being a threat, it's easier for somebody else to receive. So of course that person is projecting maybe on you all the difficult interactions that person's ever had, with somebody who gave and expected something back, or gave and then, made the person feel small or whatever. That we don't know. But I think we can keep offering and simply keep showing up for that person. And sometimes that is wisdom, sometimes it's all we can do. It's, in the face of that, it's easier perhaps to just stop offering. So our practice is that really the skillful thing to do in this moment? Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. Others? Please, Risa.
Could you talk some more about idiot compassion? That's something I have a lot of trouble with, and it's so bound up with motivation. And you can say, oh, well, if I give to this person, they're just going to go drink. But is that really true? Or is giving to that person idiot compassion? Or how do you know? How do you know whether it's your own delusion or you really have some grasp of the situation and it would actually be harmful?
Well, of course, there's no way to know for sure. Sometimes we just give anyway and kind of hope for the best. But I think there are times where we can, if we look carefully, we can see we're enabling some kind of behavior. And it might be with strangers, but it might be with our family members. It might be with our friends who maybe we know a little better. And somebody comes and says, can I have $5? And, maybe you're pretty sure what's going to happen with that, Can I have $5 for food? Well, how about if I buy you a sandwich? Right? Because sometimes I've had people say, panhandlers, can I have $10 for food? Well, I'll buy you a sandwich. Well, of course, that's not what they want. What they want is the cash so they can go do whatever it is they're going to do, So, of course, we can't always know. And I guess we have to be careful not to just sort of close off our hearts because we're worried about that. It's difficult. It's difficult because our impulse, our aspiration is to be generous. But more than one, when I used to work in downtown St. Paul, I would, talk to other people who work downtown who would say, well, here's that person and that person's panhandling, asking for money. Asking for money so they can get enough money to go home. That was a frequent thing. I'm trying to gather enough money to get a bus ticket to go home. And you'd give. And the next week they'd still be there saying, I'm trying to get enough money for a bus ticket. So you think, okay, wait a minute. That's probably not what this person is collecting for. If we have the time to listen and say what's actually going on with you, I suppose that's the best of all possible worlds. But that takes a lot of courage. that takes a lot of time, you know. And we can't take on everybody, we frankly can't take on everybody we meet, right? And it's maybe not be safe to do that. So on the one hand, you know, we want to be careful about our giving, and on the other hand, we don't want to be closed about that. That's a real challenge to navigate in our practice as bodhisattvas. So I don't have an easy answer for you. I think job one is simply that we're aware, and we're not just kind of giving any old which way, but how can we give skillfully? Because our resources are limited, right? I mean, we can't just be on the street corner, you know, giving all the time. So our own resources are limited. So where are those resources going to do the most good? Where is our generosity going to have the greatest impact? Which doesn't mean we have to give huge amounts of money, or we can only give to, you know, big nonprofits or something. But, you know, if I want to make a difference in the world, what's that going to be? And for most of us, we have some particular interest or some particular kind of work in this world that we feel able and interested to support. You know, for some people, they want to support environmental causes, or, you know, particular social causes, or, you know, the local food kitchen or whatever, you know. Let's pick something. But let's not be paralyzed by our fear about that. And of course, the term idiot compassion was not mine. It's out there in the world. I didn't make it up, and it sounds a bit kind of like, you know, unkind or something. But, you know, we can make mistakes with our giving, and I guess we just have to kind of be aware of that. So is what we're offering really going to ameliorate suffering, or are we sort of enabling, perpetuating suffering? There's no clear way to know. We just have to do our best. That was not the answer you wanted, but unfortunately that's it.
No, that was helpful, thank you.
Mark,
sorry, I was just going to maybe add to that. When I lived in St. Louis, the first year I was there, I lived near Washington University, you know, which is has all the sort of like affluence that goes along with the university, and it was very close to an extremely poor part of the city. So the sort of main commercial district, you know, you'd be asked for money like every couple steps, pretty much. I started like carrying around food with me in my bag, because that was like, you know, people would often say like, I'm hungry, like, you know, can you give me some money for food? And I would offer them food, and like almost half the time they would refuse it. They would be like, no, like I don't want that. But sometimes, you know, they would take it.
yeah.
So I think, you know, maybe, you know, again, it takes more time and more courage and stuff, but trying to like actually help them with what they say that they want is often, I think, a good solution. It might take a lot of time, like if someone's asking for a ride, you know, you could say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll give you a ride, but then of course it could be dangerous. Or whatever, but having hitchhiked myself, you know, I think most people are pretty safe.
I'm somehow just noticing more and more people, even around in town, on corners with signs saying, I'm homeless, you know, I need something. Gosh, you just see it out there and you think, what's the world coming to? And who knows if they're genuine or not, you know, but I mean, even in Japan, there are people who dress up as monks and go out and, you know, stand on the street corner because they just want the money. So it can happen. It can happen everywhere. Mark, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. I remember one time I was on my first business trip ever. I got to go to Montreal, and I was warned there were a lot of kids out there begging for change. And oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like it before. And you know, in between business, I was downtown looking, you know, just walking around the city, enjoying myself. And I saw an altercation between a lady and a beggar at a mall. And the lady was basically chastising the young beggar because she had given her she'd given her jeans, she'd given her money, and she was still there begging. You know, what'd she do? And use this money for? And clearly the lady had an expectation of giving. And for me, one of the things that I saw in that is that when you give, you don't have an expectation of coming back, of anything coming back, or receiving anything back. You think to yourself, oh yeah, great, this is wonderful. And that always comes up. That comes up in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Even death, you know. I try to live a good life. You know, you're expecting something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things infused with that. And so for idiot compassion, the way I look at it is I just see they're out there working. That is their payment. And when you give them money, you're giving them payment. And, you know, it doesn't matter what they spend it on. I'm fine with that. If they want to, you know, my joke is if they want to spend it on hookers and blow, by all means. Sure, I don't want them to. But, you know, that's not my place. My place is to see the relationship here, like, and to see the relationship. And sure, I have a lot of, and I know I have a lot of underlying motivations behind that. One of the most ones is, since I've been divorced, my ex-wife never let me do anything like that. And so I'm happy to do that. I never, you know, when I tip, that's another form of giving.
Mm-hmm.
It's never, I have no clue what 20% is anymore. And I'm fine with that. And so I see that motivation. So like, there's been times like Midway Airport, you know, when I lived in Illinois, I'd have to take people to Midway. And Cicero was always packed. And you just were you're just sitting there. And there were beggars out there, people begging, and I would just see that as more of a, we had shared time together. I have some money, here's some money. And that would be the pay, and that would be my appreciation for them for that. It's a tough thing to negotiate.
It's a very tough thing to
But it's a tough, yeah. And I know that as I continue on in this practice, I'm having a hard time with receiving.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a hard time. When I had cancer, I had a very difficult time receiving generosity from my friends. And a lot of it was, and I even, now to this day, I'm like very grateful, very thankful for them being there. But it's still, you know, it's the ongoing practice.
Yep.
And
Well, certainly in the circumstance of illness like that, in a way, it simply reminds us that we're not healthy. It reminds us that we need people, which is hard. You know, it's hard to receive in that way because it just reminds us, you know, someone's up here and we're down there, and you know, yeah, we can feel kind of strange about that. It can be difficult. So, and when you bring up receiving and you start talking to people about receiving, most of us don't realize how much we struggle with it. You know, we just think, oh, well, receive. But when we actually delve into it, it's like, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on there about self-concept and all that stuff. You know, everybody wants to be the hero and offer the money, the solution, the whatever, right? Everybody wants to be the hero. It's like, we don't want to be on the other side, being the ones who need that help. So it's a real opportunity for our practice. When somebody gives or when we need something from somebody to, you know, how can I receive that? It's more complicated than we think.
And I've been, you know, editing this book for Hojo-san, a Zoe Monkey, Shogun's a Zoe Monkey, and you know, it gives the opportunity to get like a very, very close reading
Yes.
of the text. And you know, one of the things that I was just working on the other day was the like passage where he talks about this Zen master who, like, there's a deer in the garden, and he runs after it and starts hitting the deer with a stick. And you know, one of the monks is like, "Why would you do such a thing? You know, you lack compassion." And you know, he said, well, you know, if he gets acclimated to humans, some bad person is going to shoot him and eat him. So this is the most compassionate
Yes.
you know, choice that I think I can make. So I think, yeah, I mean, sometimes the generous thing is maybe what doesn't seem to be generous at first.
Yeah, tough love, right? Yeah, I remember that story, and of course it's not what anybody expects. He's going to run after this deer and beat it with a stick. Why would you do that? But then when you think about it, you know, that's a reasonable motivation. I need to keep this deer afraid of humans because someone less generous than me is going to eat him. So it's, wait a minute, what? Another illustration of generosity can be complicated. What else this morning? All right. Thank you very much.